Typographic posters, strategies for building pictures with words. I feel like it's dark enough. If these start to look not dark enough, let me know. So our first section is hierarchy as Gestalt. So Gestalt in design terms is about this idea of how things come together to make a visual impression. One of the things is that, like, typically Gestalt is considered like this very designy thing, and it's about scale and mass and white space and negative space and form and counterform and all this stuff. But as you just sort of experienced, if you're thinking very much in a hierarchy mode, Gestalt is a natural byproduct of the process. Because if you decide this is more important than this, you then have to find a way to show that. And you either do that through space, you do that through a massive differential in form, bold to light, for example, or you do it through scale, big to small. Regardless, you end up making aesthetic decisions even if you don't intend to make aesthetic decisions, which is a very cool way to approach work, especially if you're like me and you're a little bit more linear in your thinking. If someone said like, oh, make something cool, like very deliberately, that's kind of hard for me to do. But if somebody goes, design some flyers, I have faith that working with hierarchy will get me to stuff that looks cool by being focused on finding fonts that look cool already and then using basic scale stuff so that you're not thinking about the layout in a super cerebral, annoying way. You're just like, this is more important than this. This is what really not important at all. Hide it over here. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, cool. There's now groupings and there's now Gestalt stuff happening. So these are just some examples, and they go kind of far back. So this is just an exhibition announcement from the 70s. It's like a heavy kind of international style or Swiss style thing. But it's dynamic and it's super simple. 3 sizes of type, 2 weights, organized in kind of logical groupings. There's even like a tiny bit of a conceptual thing in that you go, some artists from the list of artists is contained in that little section. And then you have like your dates and info here. And they just do this nice thing of shifting it 45 degrees or whatever. None of this is terribly conceptual. It's actually like so unbelievably rational, but it's such a clear picture of like how this works, like dramatic scale change. It's kind of it. There's not like a safe, like, oh, the big stuff is 18 point and the small stuff's 14. The big stuff is like 60 and the small stuff's 12. It's super clear. One of the reasons I show a lot of stuff from the 60s is because of a combination of like philosophy and the technology they had on hand. It was easier to solve a problem just through type whenever possible. So it becomes like the perfect way to show these ideas at work in real work, not in a conceptual like, oh, this is a textbook. It's like, no, this is a theater in Milan in 1965. And this is entirely hierarchy driven. The only thing that you could argue is decorative is these thick black lines, which actually only 2 of them would be decorative. This one and that one. The rest of them serve a functional purpose, which is to divide things up. And then there's a couple of other hierarchy decisions happening through color. Now, you might not think that this is necessarily beautiful. Massimo Vignelli is like kind of like the world's clunkiest famous designer, but it's definitely visual, even in how rigid it is. This is a poster, a movie poster by Jan Tschichold from 1927, and totally about hierarchy. Title of the movie. It's grouped with the stars, but the hierarchy is kind of simple. Title, theater, then everything else is a sort of subsection from that. And then one kind of like, one, the font is cool, but then 2, the little bit of an aesthetic decision is this bar that just creates like, it doesn't overpower everything. It actually creates kind of a nice anchor for this. And it also helps create this column that runs up there. So it's like a combination of aesthetic kind of decorative decisions. It traps this white space. Like, can you kind of tell like how this white space is a shape in here? Like, it's doing something. I don't think that you can arbitrarily start drawing and get there. You have to actually figure out what that type wants to do. And Jan Tschichold was a big advocate for the idea of you have your content, you work with it, and you figure out how it works and what it wants to do, and then you heighten whatever it normally wants to do. So you might do that. You're like, okay, it makes a cool shape here. This is kind of a cool shape. There's actually this nice flow through here. Just heighten that. It's not conceptual at all. I mean, I don't know anything about the movie. Maybe the movie's called Purple and Red, in which case it's highly conceptual, but I don't think it is. This is a poster by Josef Müller-Brockmann. So Josef Müller-Brockmann is really famous for these super dynamic series of posters that he did that the name escapes me right now, but it was like a series he did over a decade. And each one kind of explores dynamic interplay of like abstract shapes. But then he has these other posters that are just straight type, and they're entirely about hierarchy and about exploring, again, like, what does this type want to do? And then he just, like, in really simple little fashions, like, oh, look, there's this cool thing if I take first names and last names and separate them, and then I use color to heighten that. So there's like your big hierarchy thing, which is big to small. And then there's your smaller movements, which are color shifts. And then there's another sort of micro movement, which is that it makes a pretty clean shape to divide first name and last name into separate columns. And then to use that same structure and to divide this up into 3 separate hunks of information without a lot of trickiness. It's one font, 2 weights other than his design credit, or I assume that's his design credit, and then color does the rest and basic placement. This is another Muller-Brockmann, same idea. Like, these are each day of this event, this, I don't know, I should learn German, but it's a theater event in Zurich. And then what I kind of love about this is it does a depth thing, but it also is doing a hierarchy thing. 1963, Zurich, State Theater, June Fest, blah, 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 International. That's pretty awesome, and it does the depth thing. And again, you have to sketch that out and figure out if it works, right? Like, you can't just arbitrarily say it has to do this. Like, you have to have a way of working that lets you have other directions to go. But it's cool because, like, maybe there was a concept in here, but looking at it, does it need a concept? Like, probably not. This is a poster by Odermatt and TSE. These are, so far, I think we're all Swiss designers, except for Jan Tschichold, who was German, who was like the godfather of Swiss design. So this one is like a little bit more decorative and dynamic, but still it starts with like hierarchy decisions, and then they're heightened through other graphic decisions. So these cool kind of like, start to figure out some interactions that these can have. And the other thing to think about is like, this is probably letterpress. So these typefaces are fixed sizes. They are what they are. Like, if you want to know why your font menu says 6, 8, 12, 14, 18, 24, blah, 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 and stops at 72 for whatever reason, it's because those were the sizes that a letterpress case had in them. Or not a case. Those were the sizes cases came in. If this doesn't work at 16 point, it's not like you could be like, oh, cool, I'll make it 15.92. You know what I mean? Like, it works or it doesn't. And I love this one. It's just pest insecticide packaging. Totally about hierarchy. Diazinon, 50, whatever W is. Oh, wettable. And Gaiji. And then this stuff is just broken up. And then it's just heightened with one simple thing, that line, which also is probably like a slight metaphor to the idea of spraying the ground with something. And this is a more recent thing. So it's more decorative in that it's about these cool angular solutions, but it is not hard for me to imagine that the way that we work tonight, if we were doing that for a longer period of time with more focus, that we would start to figure out even more details and relationships. Like, this is really nice, right? The E to the F right there, the G to the Y and the B to the O. Like, it looks like it's on a grid, but it's also lining up so perfectly that there's like a tension of figuring out what it wants to do already. And this one I love because it's so simple and brutal. Super cool font, big type, small type. The small type helps break out the dates, and the dates help break out that small type. And it's just black and white. And that font is doing, really the zeros are doing 90% of the work in this thing. These are great. Supposedly the designer's Atelier de Ceramica. I'm not sure I'm buying that they're called like Workshop of Ceramics, but sure. But these posters are super cool. So one, we got the visual anchor thing happening, and it's like highlighted in the color. Workshop is both a hierarchy decision and it's doing that sort of visual anchor thing. And then super cool typefaces, again, a pretty minimal amount of decoration. And if there's a concept in it, we don't know what it is and we don't care. Like, I can enjoy this with or without a concept because there's a whole bunch of other stuff that is making it visually engaging. If you think about like the concept being the thing where it's like, oh, it's like an old-timey circus poster. Like, that's a very verbal concept where you're taking one thing and you're making it look like another. This is like probably not like that. Like, I don't know what this looks like. It looks like itself. And then this one is a magazine cover by Jan Tschichold, where it kind of starts out with that hierarchy-based thing, and then it spreads into this kind of painting idea, like figuring out what the type can do and then carving out space around it. And it's cool because it's like it's doing a lot of like, one is really clear. The magazine's called TM. TM, it's the poster issue, affiches. So, oh, and then Jan Tschichold up there. And it looks like it's only 2 sizes. And then they just use the color and the spacing and the arrangement to do the rest of the job and make this pretty interesting dynamic looking thing with basically a bunch of squares and 2 fonts. At first glance, I thought this was like an actual poster for a thing. It looks more like a collage, but it holds up nonetheless in that if this was all sort of real content, which it very well may be, even though I can't make sense of it, it fully feels sort of hierarchy oriented. Secreto is the biggest thing, then this stuff, then this. But then it's got all this texture. So like it's starting to have a concept, but the concept feels tonal. You're not sure what it's about, but you get the sense that it feels like it's about something, which is cool. Okay, and then font as form. This is looking at things where the font itself is working so hard that you almost don't have to do anything. So this is a cover of like an Italian design annual. I think it's by Franco Grignani. I couldn't find a credit. It's basically this crazy computer like 1960s typeface with the Italian flag colors. But the font is doing so much on its own, like the colors are just like nice icing on the cake. There's a bunch of stuff coming up that's by Herb Lubalin. There's a lot of modification happening here, but Lubalin's big thing was like just to take, and his partners in the company, take like a body of text and a font and jam it in there and make it super visual, even though like, what is this? It's basically all caps. It's avant-garde actually. I was gonna say it's all caps Futura. It's all caps avant-garde with super tight leading and super tight tracking, and then they just went and customized it and jammed pieces into each other. What's crazy is like they had to draw this. If you had the same idea, it would take you 8 minutes to execute now. And I don't even know like how much of an idea it is. I wonder if they're just like, let's try this, and then just keep drawing it with tracing paper until it worked. This is the specimen for ITC Serif Gothic, which is like one of the typefaces they designed, and they would design typefaces to do the things they wanted them to do. So they would build in these crazy ligatures like this LI and the TH or whatever, But if you ever use like Serif Gothic or Avant-Garde or Lubalin Graph, even without the crazy ligatures, they want to work like this. Like just, they want to like lock in and jam into each other. It's really nice. Especially like if you don't feel creative, you can just find a good font and just jam it in next to itself. This is another example. This is probably like ITC Garamond. And they start to like overlap stuff and like look for cool little ways to tuck things in and just make a dense wall of type. I don't know what this, oh wait, it's an Edward, what's his name? Edward Palazzi? I don't know how to pronounce his name. Exhibition catalog, but I have no credits for it except that it is amazing. I think this show is called Moon Spirit Empire News. I found this on Pinterest yesterday and it blew my mind. But like the font is doing everything. I guess the color too. And then for like a more modern one, this is some work by Non-Format. This is like a detail of a tote bag. So for a while, their whole deal was to design fonts that looked amazing without them having to try. So they just like, cool, set that font and then we're done. They worked like this probably for like 2 years. This is a concert flyer by Jan Tschichold, maybe? Looks like a really simple custom typeface built on angles and perfect, or actually little screwy O's with lines in them. It's pretty awesome. There's some slight decisions, right, about like placement and space, but this typeface is really what the whole thing is about. I couldn't find a credit on this, but kind of same idea. Sort of weird, super rigid black letter font for a book cover. Yeah, like they indented it, but that font is kind of doing everything. But this one's really nice. It's like a traditional font with that then they modified through these kind of hash marks, and it just creates this like really kind of wonderful overall grid. And then lo and behold, super high contrast size stuff happening. And then this is a print by Spin, who are using a Vim Crowell font from probably the early 60s. So he made this font for a calendar. And then they just did like a print with it. And you can see like the way that the 2 and the 0 interlock. They make that kind of amazing little form right there. And like it's like impossible not to see the connections between all the pieces. This is a poster for the Bauhaus Archive. It's not like the craziest font, though that G and the P are doing some cool stuff, but it looks like it's highly, I wonder if it's highly custom, but really it's like all about that, and then they just layer in these photographs of the Bauhaus dormitories. So it's like really simple. I mean, like the idea is so simple. What is it? We're just gonna say Walter Gropius in big letters and then put a photo behind it. But then it's awesome because the font does so much. And then this is some cool work by, I don't think this studio's around anymore. They were called the Remingtons, or every time they did a show flyer, they'd make like a custom typeface and pretty much just center it. Okay, and then visual anchors. So this is an exhibition poster by Armin Hoffman. Armin Hoffman, Josef Müller-Brockmann, and Emil Reuter are probably like the chief architects of the idea of like Swiss graphic design. They literally wrote the books on it that were entirely filled with their own work and their students' work. They were like excellent propagandists. And they ran design departments in like the 2 major areas of Switzerland. Armin Hoffman's whole deal most of the time, like when he did posters, they were usually black and white because he sort of felt like why bother with color if the black and white is doing what it needs to do? There shouldn't even need color. And he would usually just pick something from the text and then make that the main anchor. So in this one, basically S for Smith. Oh no, S for Smith and J for Jansen. Figured out how to make those 2 pieces work together and then just integrate everything else into it. So simple and so bold. This is another one. Maurice Esteve and Berto Ladera, E.L. You just figure out like the most obvious thing, like how do these things work together, and then work from there. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that's the only, like that was his gimmick, it was the only thing he ever did. I'm just picking the things that work really well for my purposes. But they kind of show like the degree to which you do that. This is like, for whatever reason, one of my favorite things ever. This is posted by Rosemary TSE, who was like half of Automat and TSE. So it's a 2-day like craft festival, I believe. This is the 27th and the 28th. These 2 things run the show, and then it's actually just a really simple 3-column grid based on the numbers. There's 1, 2, 3, and everything is sort of like situated in relationship to that 27 and 28. And this really nice shift of a rich black, because I think it's overprinting on the red, to a flat black. This is by Jacqueline Casey, who was an American designer who was one of the designers at MIT. So what she would very often do, so this is an exhibition poster, 6 artists. She would find something really obvious and then make a kind of amazing typographic illustration from that. So this says 6. I'm going to take a wild guess that they're also American, and that's why it's red, white, and blue. Here's another one 15 years later. 3 exhibitions, this big 3, and then everything else just kind of fits in it. The thing I love about these is I don't think you see a lot of stuff that's this bold anymore, where like scale is pushed so hard. It must have been a really nice moment in time when you could just be like, everything else is 12-point Helvetica and we're just going to space it out because the big thing that matters is this giant 3. And, and she didn't have to put in 14 sponsor logos in the corner. This stuff like is still popular. Like if you go over like Pinterest is for whatever reason is all hand-drawn, inspirational messages and old school Swiss typography. And I think it's the boldness of it, and it reproduces small really well. A giant 3 kind of works really well, as opposed to like if you lived through the 1990s and like every Taco Bell menu was like a distorted anarchist letter or whatever. That stuff doesn't look so hot at 2 inches by 2 inches. This I actually think is new. I thought this was old based on like everything about it, but this date is leading me to believe it's from 2011. But it is Lenny Urs Vorträge, LUV. It's definitely retro, but like the same idea. Super obvious detail. Like it's almost dumb. Like what are you gonna do? Oh, just make the initials really big. Like this is a poster from the 70s. Like Tom Eckersley. So this big visual, the visual anchor is it's about an exhibition of work of boys and girls in their final primary years. So like middle school through high school, right? So it's those years, and then the font is cool and it's colorful. But essentially, like again, it's like such a big, it's like a dumb idea. But you look at it and you're like, oh, that looks awesome. What is that? This is a series of magazine covers. This is the same magazine that we saw the Jan TSE cover that was largely black with the little red squares. These 2 students at the Basel School of Design for a year did covers for the magazine where basically they just did the issue number as a large abstraction. So this is issue 5, this is issue 12, and then everything else is just one size of universe. And this is by Dan Freedman. And Dan Freedman is an American designer who went to Basel and came back and then helped propagandize Swiss typography. So this is kind of what I was saying, the idea of a visual anchor that's further abstracted. It's now a pattern. So basically it says AGS, and it's just like a cool abstract illustration using that very obvious thing and then making something unexpected from it. This is an annual report. I could not find the credit, but I love it. Like 13, 14. You know what it reminds me of is I don't know what you call those boxes that are utility boxes. Never mind. I do know what you call them. That one of them, they're always dark gray with an orange logo that's basically that same font. I can't remember what they is, but every time I see one, I photograph it. So my phone is filled with like dozens of them. But that's what it looks like. But it's like so cool. Like the font just does everything. Big numbers are always great. This is one of the guys that was part of the Remingtons. I think it's 2 exhibitions. So it was a giant 2. And you get some nice stuff happening, like cool negative shape right there. Cool thing happening there. These are, speaking of 90s clutter, these are table of contents pages from Speak magazine, which is a pretty interesting magazine from the 90s. Basically, Martin Venensky, the designer, throughout the whole front matter, he would just explore like collage layouts using as the primary focal point the number of that issue. So if you couldn't figure out, this would be issue 15, and this is 16. And then this is another Armin Hoffman thing, and this starts to show like if you were to complexify that super simple visual anchor. So it's a museum poster, and now it's bringing in the types of stuff that are in the museum. So it's the same thing, like those are the initials of the museum, and then now it's layered in with photography. And like, granted, it's super simple, but it's already like more dynamic. And you start to go like, oh, I could imagine doing stuff around that. And then this thing is so over the top. So it's got the hierarchy thing happening. It's also got this amazing visual anchor of steps 1 through 7 just overlaid on each other. And this is a record about how to listen to records, which is amazing. So that's fantastic. Like, the color overlays are just like so good. You know, like people always like tell you like don't use the effects in Photoshop or InDesign. What? Go nuts. And then this is another one where it's like a visual anchor, but now it's layered in with collage. So it's this drug, it's called like salutacortin. This is a big D. And it's also an illustration of what it does. So it's a injectable like prednisone. It's like a, and so you have like a syringe, and then it's coming in, and it's like affecting your inflammation. And it's got this little thing here because I guess the composition was unresolved at the bottom. So I gotta fix that. Oh no, that's the end of the D. I thought it was more of like a D. No, it's a legit D. Look at that. That's cool. Oh, I'm done. So that's cool. What happens? This is a link. So there's a longer video. It's like 45 minutes, and it's purely about the idea of hierarchy and different ways of achieving it, down to anti-hierarchy, like purposefully not having a hierarchy and what that does. And then this is like an in-class lecture that just digs more into the idea of Swiss typography and why it exists. Okay. So I don't know what time it is.
9:26.
Oh, I guess we're done. Let's see. We have one thing. Let me give you.